Hello and welcome to the debate. My name is Naila, Shuja. Now we're bringing you the biggest stories shaping our world, and who better to navigate these complex and current issues than our brilliant senior analysts, Mr. Farrukh Pitafi and Mr. Raja Faisal. And now tonight, viewers, we are going to be delving into two monumental topics. First, we're going to be looking across the Atlantic at the United States presidential elections 2024. This is the presidential race, and it's a showdown that will have global ripples. Now, in this segment, we are going to be joined by Dr. Awais Saleem, Associate Professor at the Lamar University in the state of Texas. And then we are also going to be joined by Jahangir, Khattak, a senior analyst who is going to be speaking to us on Skype as well from the state of New York. Now, in our second segment, we're going to be shifting the focus to our backyard, and we're going to be speaking about Iran's foreign minister who is in town on a two-day official visit. We are going to be discussing about not just the diplomatic handshakes, but we're also going to be getting into the nitty-gritty discussions that could really redefine the Middle East situation and the alliances. And this conversation is going to be heavy. It's going to be fully jam-packed. So let's just get into it. Now, the question that we're all concerned about: who is going to take the hot seat in the White House? Now, I want to come to Faisal and ask you, who do you think is going to take the hottest seat in the White House?
Trump is going to be someone who's going to take a seat in the Oval Office, and to me, I think the way he was campaigning for his presidency, second presidency, this is being considered and hailed as marvelous in US as well. If we look at social mediums, the kind of tapping into social mediums done by the Republicans this time around, that was unprecedented. And of course, we saw very familiar faces like Elon Musk, who's been constantly appearing with Donald Trump, and not the other side. That is, of course, pivotal. And if we overall look at the situation, the kind of response he was getting from different sets of votes, I would say the Arab votes and Muslim especially votes, and then of course he's been going to the Latino votes as well. And if we talk about the colored votes, he has been of course outreaching to them as well, which was quite unprecedented. And the kind of stigma which always been hailed or hurled towards Trump of being someone who is sort of very narrow-minded when it comes to America as a society full of color, that is going away now. And I think better understanding is prevailing about Trump as a president. So in coming obviously days, we will be seeing that the eventual results would be, of course, in the favor of Trump rather than Kamala herself. Kamala, who happens to be, of course, hailing from the color side, of course, she has very strong bonding with the Black Americans as well as Indian descent as well. So she has that side with her. But if we look at the recent events, especially whatever happened since last year, October, the kind of silence we saw, that silence is being considered as a criminal, and these votes would decide how criminal it was.
Absolutely. Now, again, I would just like to welcome our guests who are joining us on Skype. Dr. Awais Saleem, the Associate Professor at Lamar University, who is hailing from the U.S. state of Texas, and Mr. Jahangir Khattak, who is a senior analyst. They're both joining us on Skype. Now, Dr. Awais, I would like to pose this question to you. Who is going to take the hottest seat in the White House?
Well, that's the million-dollar question that everybody is asking these days. And if we go by the polls, there is not much to choose from. Kamala Harris in the latest polls is kind of locked neck to neck. And in some key states, she is showing slight edge, but that edge is not statistically significant. So there is little to choose from. But we also have to keep in mind that in 2016, all polls were showing that Hillary Clinton is winning comfortably, but then we saw that Donald Trump is winning. So, in this contentious environment where political polarization is high, issues for non committed voters, particularly, matter a lot. Economy is at the heart of all this discussion. And in my personal opinion, the role of immigrant communities is not being discussed in the US mainstream media as it should have. So they hold the key, in my personal opinion, even in the battleground states. And that's why, even in 2020, we saw key battleground states like Georgia and Pennsylvania and Arizona falling for Joe Biden, the Democratic candidate, because of the Latino community and other immigrant communities. So, if that pattern persists, I think that it will benefit Kamala Harris in this campaign as well.
All right, now switching it over to you, Mr. Khattak, who do you think is going to be taking the hot seat?
I think what Dr. Saab just explained, uh, I agree with him. And two things will really matter today. One is trends, which we have been seeing, and the other is turnout. So trends and turnout will, I think, impact the result. We saw the trend early this morning, rather last night, because in the US, the voting process starts virtually at midnight in the state of New Hampshire, where voting opens at 12 a.m. And in the city, there's a very small town near the Canadian border, about 20 miles away from Canadian border. It's called Dixville Notch, and it has 6 registered voters. 4 of them are Democrats, 2 are Republicans. And they came up for the vote last night. And within 9 or 10 minutes, the results were out. And what were the results? The results were that 3 went to Trump and 3 went to Harris. Now, I know 6 votes do not count, but the trend does. And what was the trend? In 2020 elections, again, at that time, it was a contest between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And in 2020, in this place, in this Dixville Notch, Joe Biden secured 5 out of 5 votes. At that time, they had 5 registered voters, which means that the vote has split. Will this trend continue? I'm not sure. But there are some other numbers to back it. What are those numbers? There is an organization, like a national organization, who follow the voter turnout trends. What they found, they analyzed the data from 27 states, and they found that in those states, the total turnout, which so far, like in early voter turnout, was about like 80 million votes have been cast. In the US, there are 161 million, at least one more than that, but 161 million registered voters. So out of that, 80 million have been cast. So half of the result is already in, even though we don't know. And then, according to this report that they just released last night, they say that there's a trend that Republicans are coming out in greater numbers than Democrats. Like the national average, the difference is about 2%, 37% for Republicans, 35% for Democrats. Whereas in the battleground states, the difference varies, like it varies between 2 to 5%, and that is in favor of Republicans. If we were to say in one sentence, in early voting, it looks like more Republicans voted than Democrats. Now let's go back into history, what the history tells us. The history tells us that every time more voters turn out, it helps Democrats. And we see that the voter turnout is low, not just on the part of Democratic Party itself, but if you look at the overall numbers, which is 80 million in pre-election or pre-polling vote, so that 80 million is less than what we saw in 2020 and what we saw in 2020. In 2020, by the time last night when these numbers were released that 80 million vote is in, by that time in 2020, 110 million vote was in, which means that the voter turnout overall, early voting turnout is low. What does it indicate? It indicates that maybe like, I don't want to project anything, but I'm just saying that based on the trends and the history, we can say that it may give a little bit of edge to Donald Trump. Another thing, we come across so many surveys, like there are tens of organizations who are releasing surveys by the hour that, oh, this is what's happening. But there are websites which aggregate the like the trends, these surveys. And one of the website which I follow, basically Real Clear Politics, they say that Trump is like, we have 7 battleground states. Everybody knows it starts with Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Georgia, Nevada, and Arizona. These are 7 states where basically the real battle is happening. And they say that overall, then the voter turnout in these states has also been pretty high. And that is tilting towards Republicans. And I think that more voter turnout will help Republicans. And according to these numbers that I just mentioned, in these 7 states, according to Real Clear Politics, which aggregates the poll results of at least 10 different sources, 10 different organizations, and they say that Trump is leading in 5 of the battleground states, even though the margins are very thin. In some places, they are in a virtual tie. Nationally, Trump and Kamala Harris are in a virtual tie. So it's very tough to say that, oh, this person will win or this person will win. But if we were to follow any trends and turnout, those are the two key words, I think then it looks like it may help Trump.
All right, understandable. Now coming to Farrukh, what about you? Who do you think's going to take the hot
What
seat?
about me?
Yeah.
I'm not running in the US election. By the way, I'm so glad that Khattak Saab actually not only reflected on the opinion polls, but also spoke about real numbers that are on ground, right? Because there are two very important things. One, early voting that went on in certain states, you are allowed to actually vote ahead of the election date as well. But then there are other instances where, of course, one might be actually looking at the trends right now. There must be some snafu regarding the averages that he is actually mentioning and that I have seen. I've seen that more, 2 or 3 very interesting things have happened. One, because pollsters usually don't actually go by the new inclusions in the number game, right? For example, new registered voters are not accounted for. And there was a groundswell of women actually registering, young women were registering to vote in the elections, and their turnout has been quite a lot as well. But as was pointed out, that if whichever way it breaks, it again comes to statistical tie. Why so? Because the polls might show, a slight edge to one candidate or the other. For example, in popular, votes, most of the analyses are actually showing, and I'm going to talk about Real Clear Politics as well, which is great. But in most of them, popular vote-wise, Kamala Harris seems to be ahead. But of course, that does not mean much because most of that lead is within margin of error. But then we see something very interesting that happened last night, and that was PBS's survey came out. And in that, what we saw was that she has actually transcended the margin of error, and she has gone to 4%. That said, it is high time for projections that are happening. If I am leaning towards Democrats, I'm going to see Kamala Harris actually making headway. If I'm leaning towards, Trump, then I'm going to see a lot of things going towards Trump. But it is dead heat right now. One thing happened that was quite intriguing, and that was while we are talking about these states which are battleground states or swing states, one state which is not, their newspaper, leading newspaper, and I'm talking about Iowa, their leading newspaper is Des Moines, newspaper, that actually came up with something very interesting, that in Iowa, which traditionally votes for Republicans, Kamala Harris is leading Donald Trump by 3 or 4%. That was quite intriguing. it is said that Donald Trump was upset because Des Moines Register actually it's something which is considered to be gold standard. But here's the thing, if it can work in one side, in one direction, then Donald Trump is also not your average everyday Republican. He comes from New York. New York has those small pockets which might actually be leaning towards Republicans. Similarly in California, Orange County, so many other places where you see that there is always a Republican push. So it can lean in both directions. My assessment or my understanding, and again, this is not about what actually who wins, but who should win. So I would rather lean towards Kamala Harris, and that is because I believe that unlike Donald Trump, her associates, her projects, her platforms are something that I can actually see eye to eye. When it comes to Donald Trump, his project 2025, especially since he got the VP candidate with him, and who has written the introduction to the book of the author of Project 2025. Since then, it is thought that if that 900-page document is going to be enforced, America and world order might actually be unhinged for quite some time. So, by the way, remember that there is a lot riding right now, because on one side there is a clear ideological divide between the two sides, which is very sharp. Then two of the Supreme Court justices might retire, and if Donald Trump is there, then the number of judges he might actually appoint to the Supreme Court might actually reach 5, because he has already installed 3. And similarly, when it comes to Roe v. Wade or women's right on their own body or choices, that is something that seems to be galvanizing at least a huge number of women to vote for Kamala Harris. So it is up in the air. If anybody says that it is going to lean this way or that way, I think, like me, they might like the project right now.
Yeah, Naila, with your permission, I wanted to actually ask a question from Dr. Awais. Dr. Awais, as you are already very close to the students we have been hearing about since last year, because they have been the one who've been on the roads and protesting against Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris set up whatever they were doing in Middle East. And of course we saw that they were very mishandled, the harsh handedness we have been experiencing since last year. And earlier, of course, very rightly pointed out by Khattak Saab that the turnout this time around, it's significant, it's quite different, it is increasing. And he also mentioned that last time around when the turnout was good, Democrats won. Can we say that this time around it can change and Republicans can win, especially when we know that Farrukh rightly pointed out that young voters have registered, and majority of them, they are female voters who have registered. Where do you see the trend going towards of the young voters, especially young females, voting for? Either they are voting for Trump or Kamala Harris. If they are voting for Trump, is it because of the harsh handedness of the government?
And by the way,
well, you see, the American electorate, like everywhere else, is not a homogeneous group.
That's one question. Dr. Awais, one question in addition to what Faisal was saying. Which government was responsible for the crackdown on the campuses? Was it the local government, which usually controls the police? Was it the campus administration, or was it the federal government?
And that local government was actually inside US, are we talking about, right?
Absolutely. You see, that's let me address the question of these protests and how these protests were handled. First, to start with, this is unheard of, but not something that has not happened in the US or at the US campuses earlier. The last we saw such crackdowns on protests was during the Vietnam War, when students went to protests at their campuses and were dealt harshly in this manner. Now, in the last 4 or 5 decades, since the US has moved on, and there is a lot of talk about freedom of information, First Amendment, democracy, and all those things. So it was unexpected, but it happened. And it did infuriate the younger demographic. Almost 41 million new voters have been added to the electorate during last 4 years, and a dominant majority of them includes younger demographic, and they don't look at politics through the traditional lens like these two big parties have. And of course, it was since law enforcement is very much a state subject and states are autonomous, so it was dealt by the states and their law enforcement agencies, but you cannot rule out push from the federal government in whatever was happening, because their stance was very clear that they were siding with Israel in whatever was happening, and they didn't want to hear any voices in dissent. Now, Kamala Harris has been part of this administration, and there is an incumbency factor. But ever since she has won the nomination, we have seen her kind of moving away or trying to disassociate her from the policies of Joe Biden, as if she was not part of that. We saw her at a campaign event where she kind of acknowledged the protesters who were raising slogans and said that she would call for ceasefire and she would try to make sure that the war comes to an end. After Netanyahu's visit, she issued a statement in which again she tried to take a different stance from what the policies of the government that she had been a part of had been ever since the conflict started. But I think what has gone in her favor primarily is that the left-leaning liberals who these youngsters at campuses look up to, like Bernie Sanders, like Rashida Tlaib, like AOC, who are still part of the US Congress, they have already endorsed Kamala Harris. So that, in a way, has offset what her tainted or slightly tainted contribution in this administration has been, because even in Gaza conflict, there is very little to choose from. If you look at Donald Trump and try to compare his stance with hers, again, he has not even uttered a word on Gaza war or against Israel in the entire campaign. From the Republican National Convention stage, there were chants that finished the job, which means that they were urging Israel to go all the way. So for these younger demographics, perhaps there is a slight opening with Democratic Party that they can work with, but they don't see any such thing with the Republican Party. If they decide to vote for the Republican Party or Donald Trump, there will be only one consideration, and that is economy. Whatever they have seen with Donald Trump in his last 4 years with regards to his immigration policy, with regards to his policy towards Israel, I think for these youngsters or for immigrants on the whole, it will be a very difficult decision to bank on Donald Trump to change his own personality or his policies in the next 4 years.
All right. So Jahangir, now I want to come to you for a second and really talk about the media endorsements that are going on regarding the Trump campaign and the Harris campaign, right? So they have been various media endorsements and they have been influential in the past elections as well. But with several newspaper agencies now choosing to not say or not utter a word or pick a side, what can we believe that this shift might impact in the public trust in the media and basically sway the undecided voters?
I think that there are a few things that we should keep in consideration. And yes, newspaper endorsements do matter, but I don't think that they are rule of the thumb or they are the last word. They are never. And also, newspaper endorsements are generally on party lines. They're partisan. They're not. That's why Washington Post has announced that they will not endorse any candidate just to keep their independence, make sure that they're independent, because they have been seen leaning towards Democrats. Similarly, Los Angeles Times saw the same thing. They had a newsroom rebellion of the sorts because when it decided that we will not endorse anyone, so there were protests that no, we want to endorse. So that is one thing that is happening within the media. I don't want to discount its impact. Yes, it may have impact, but it does not have decisive impact. So I will just set that aside. One thing that Dr. Saab, I think, commented, and I would like to comment on that as well, because those are the things that are shaping this entire campaign. Number one is that in terms of issues, yes, American elections traditionally have been decided on domestic issues, economy being at the top. In this election, we do see that economy is at the top, and then border security and immigration is a big issue, and wars. According to Pew Research, Pew released a research report in September this year, where they asked voters that what are your top issues. So interestingly enough, foreign policy came down to fourth position, which is rarely like just like it was mentioned earlier that we saw such kind of behavior in terms of voters, choices was during Vietnam War. So it looks like foreign policy will make a big impact. Second, there is a like a floating voter. There, the American public opinion is deeply divided over wars, whether it is the war in Ukraine or war in the Middle East, rather wars in the Middle East, and then don't forget Africa, where Sudan is also, going through a bloody war. But in on the American electorates, like their own choices, so they pay more attention to the wars in Ukraine and Middle East. Now, here are the choices which are very stark. And I think that you can see the polling results that have come out, especially from the Muslim community. And why it matters, I'll tell you that as well. Because the overall impact of these wars is so much that Kamala Harris, many people think that if she is elected, it will be 4 more years of the 4 Biden years, which means that there will be no big change in the policy. Now, what kind of big change American voters are looking for? American voters are not looking for adjustments in policy. Rather, they want to see a decisive change in the policy which can bring some impact on the ground, that is to end the wars. Does Kamala Harris have a plan? No, she does not. She wants to arm Ukraine more. She wants to stand with Israel more. And she does believe in two-state solution, but she is not giving any roadmap. Now let's go to Donald Trump. Donald Trump is saying that even though he doesn't have a roadmap either, he's saying, or rather he's claiming that if he is elected, he will bring peace to Ukraine. He will end the Ukraine war. He will bring peace in Lebanon and Gaza. And on what terms, nobody knows. But this word peace is very powerful. And look at the impact that it has. I will just give you the example of Muslim vote. Even though there are 4.5 million Muslims in America, according to Council on American Islamic Relations, which is the largest Muslim civil rights group, they say that they did a survey about a month ago in which they found that for Muslims, the division is very, very clear. 42.3% of the Muslim vote is in favor of neither Kamala Harris nor Donald Trump. Rather, it is Dr. Jill Stein. Who is Dr. Jill Stein? She is the third candidate, presidential candidate from the Greens Party. And it looks like she will get some vote. So followed by Kamala Harris, 41% and 10% for Trump. Now, just zoom into the battleground states and see how it will impact the voter decision. Besides those who participated in the campus protests, where people were targeted just because of their opinion, and they lost their careers as well. Their academic years were lost because of the oppressive policies of the local administrations who came very hard on them. So those voters, do you think will support Kamala Harris or anyone, not Donald Trump, anyone who is anti-war? So I think there is a very distinct choice. In terms of Muslims, let's go to just Michigan. Now, many people are talking about Michigan. Why it matters? It matters. Why? Because one of the largest Muslim vote resides in Michigan. How many voters? There are about 240,000 Muslim voters. Why they matter? Because there are millions out there. Because Joe Biden won the Michigan state in 2020 by 154,000 votes margin. How many Muslim voters there? 240,000. Now, if that vote is divided, and remember, overwhelming majority of the Muslim vote is Democratic. That's why Michigan elected a Muslim congresswoman, the Palestinian American Rashida Tlaib. Let's go back to Pennsylvania. What's happening there? In Pennsylvania, Joe Biden in 2020 won by 81,000 votes. How many Muslim votes reside there? 170,000. How many are expected to cast? Like if you go to the trends, I think at least 30% to 50% can cast. 50% is too ambitious, but still. So it means that the Muslim vote will have a decisive role there as well. How will Muslim voters decide? Will they decide on their home budget, or will they decide after they look at the bloody images that are coming from Gaza? What will impact them most? Who will relate themselves more with Gaza than anybody else? So I feel that this, even though none of the candidates have a solid plan for peace in these two wars, or even for that matter, on the economic front, I think that in this election, one thing that I have noticed is that there is more conversation about rhetoric and less on programs. And the programs are also, I think, even though Kamala Harris has given more details than compared to Trump, but overall, I think they are really short on detail. And also, one thing that so far people have found is that both will increase American budget deficit. So it will not, I don't know how it will help the economy.
Absolutely. Farrukh, would you care to add anything to this?
Yeah, but particularly two or three things which are very important, and I thought that I should address them as well. One is deficit, and it is fascinating because I remember I spoke about genuine ideological differences. On one side is this policy, at least Democrats believe, that if you want to ensure delivery of good services, then you have to have some regulatory framework, right? Especially when it comes to price gouging and umpteen other things, inflation, for instance. On the other side, you see Republicans who want to actually remove those regulations. Then about taxation. When it comes to Democrats, they want to tax the billionaires, which are not paying that much tax. And then Republicans want to remove as many taxes from the rich, because that is how you actually invite more business into your country. So what is Donald Trump's solution? He says that we do away with all the taxes. At least in one talk that I was listening, he said, I want to remove all the taxes and replace them with tariffs. If tariffs are imposed, who is going to actually suffer most? It is going to be the common man on the street, right? Because they are going to be forced to buy those things at expensive rates. At this moment, both these candidates are not your traditional candidates, and we have gone into that as well. But I wanted also to talk about Dr. Jill Stein, or for that matter, the other party, the fourth party that is also in the run, that is Libertarian Party, whose head is Oliver. Both these are essentially outliers, and they are conduits to waste of vote. At least Michigan Muslims, at least those who actually openly came out, did the smart thing. They went forward and endorsed Donald Trump. At least you know that you are endorsing one of the potential winning candidates. Jill Stein is this amazing woman who was partially, if not totally, responsible for the fall of Hillary Clinton in 2016, because in many battleground states where Hillary lost, but she had a narrow loss, right? The sum of the number of votes that were cast in favor of Trump versus Hillary, that difference was lesser than what went to Jill Stein. And Jill Stein, amazingly, was invited to one of Putin's parties, and there she sat with General Flynn, who is very close to Donald Trump, used to be very close to Donald Trump. So one thing that I want to request every person, South Asian, Muslim, don't waste your vote. Don't abstain. Don't send it to Oliver or Jill Stein. A vote for Jill Stein is a vote for Trump. A vote for Oliver is a vote for Kamala Harris. So why not actually go and own your actual choices? Have the moral courage to do that. But having said that, my humble submission at this moment is that when you talk about underestimated candidates, Donald Trump is never underestimated. He is always overestimated. In 2016, they did something very outstanding where every pollster kept on saying that he might not win, but there was clear evidence when you looked at his rallies, how many thousands of people were going there as compared to the other side. But this time, I think it is very close. And if people want to underestimate Kamala Harris, they can do it. But I don't think that is going to land you anywhere, because there seems to be a genuine momentum there as well. As I pointed out yesterday, Kamala Harris is not Hillary Clinton. On one side, there is no October surprise where Comey letter actually comes, and you know that FBI is going to investigate and perhaps arrest you even if you win. This is not the case here. Similarly, when Hillary Clinton was running, she called Trump supporters basket of deplorables. When recently Fox News, but Ted Bear asked Kamala Harris to comment on the sanity of people who were supporting Trump, she refused to call them names, and she said she respects everybody. There seems to be a very different kind of dynamic right now. And remember that this comes after Dobbs decision, where Roe v. Wade has been thrown out, and there is anger regarding that as well, because there are stories of women actually dying or bleeding out outside clinics. So these things are going to be very interesting. By the way, I wanted to correct one more thing. Rashida Tlaib, I think, did not endorse Kamala Harris. Others did. AOC did. And Bernie Sanders, while he was a little bit late, but he also endorsed. And this dynamic of minorities, ethnic minorities, Latinos, even though many say that Latinos are not in a position to change dynamics of elections in battleground states, say Pennsylvania, but I think even then, there also, they are playing an important role, and people have failed to understand which way they are going, because if you are a pollster, you have to be culturally sensitive towards Latinos, others as well, and that doesn't seem to be the case right now.
Naila, I just wanted to correct myself. Yesterday, I actually mentioned in the show that there were 1,300 deaths of Muslims of Gaza and Palestine during the Trump's time. As obviously Khattak Saab was mentioning about Gaza and how it is going to be, of course, playing its role as well, I wanted to correct myself today. Of course, one of my friend who works for the United Nations, he sent me details of all of the United Nations organizations from 2016 to 2020, while Trump was ruling and he was securing the Oval Office. There was 673, the actual number, which was actually counted by different organizations of United Nations, that actually lost their lives in Palestine. Whereas since last year, Kamala Harris being vice president, we have seen more than 45,000 Palestinians, they lost their life in this war, and of course we already know who's supporting this war and who's been the vice president.
Absolutely, and with that, viewers, I'd like to thank our guests for joining us on Skype, Dr. Awais Saleem and Mr. Jahangir Khattak for joining us for this segment on the U.S. election. So thank you so much for participating. And now we are moving towards the second segment, which is the backdrop of various discussions in a significant aspect where the Iranian foreign minister has arrived in Pakistan for a two-day official visit, and they're going to be navigating the challenges in the regional landscapes and Iran's strategic position in the Middle East and Pakistan's regional security, and various aspects are going to be discussed between the two leaders of, you know, the foreign minister of Pakistan and the foreign minister of Iran. And now, with that being said, I'd like to take the conversation towards Faisal and really get down into the nitty-gritties, understanding how the implications or the impacts of this meeting are going to take place for the broader region of the Middle East.
Yeah, Naila, if we talk about this year has been very busy in terms of interactions between Pakistan and Iran. Islamabad and Tehran, they have been, of course, interacting with each other on various issues, of course, related to terrorism as well. Whatever happened earlier this year, we already know that there was a sort of a missile attack in Pakistan from the Iranian side, which was reciprocated from Pakistan's side, and of course we neutralized a good number of terrorists who were in Sarawan, Iran. And after that, of course, we saw that president of Iran came to Pakistan, and of course in that context, we saw that the cooperation in terms of dealing with these terrorists, it was enhanced, and we know that intelligence sharing, which already was existing there, it was further improved to counter all of this menace. But right now, at this juncture, when we are seeing that so much is going on in Middle East, and of course we know that Iran is directly involved in whatever is happening in Middle East. In that context, this meeting is very important, and I believe somehow Iran knows that Pakistan is the most important country of this side of the region, and Iran believes that if whatever is going on with Iran and the Middle Eastern crisis, they want to assure that of course Pakistan knows about it, and there must have been many other things that must have been highlighted related to security issues with Pakistan's premier office, and that is important. But in further coming days, we will come to know what is the outcome of it, these meetups and interactions, but it is very important at this hour.
Now, Farrukh, I'd like to direct the same question to you, but I'd like to add another aspect to this, where both Iran and Pakistan have reiterated their support for an independent Palestinian state based on the pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. And our foreign minister, Ishaq Dar, has emphasized that the Palestinian and the Kashmiri issue are deeply rooted in the self-determination and should be resolved peacefully, adhering to the United Nations resolutions and the UN Charter. Could you elaborate on this a little?
Right. Both these countries are part of OIC. So it is part of OIC's charter, right? This is part of their principles, so to speak, that independent, Palestine, Palestinian state, and also Kashmir being independent, the Kashmir being given their right to choose between India and Pakistan. And that actually essentially them coming to Pakistan. So these are important critical values that are there. But I don't, because these are larger but broader context, and Faisal has already spoken about that, I don't want to actually go into those things which are not within Pakistan's theater, right? Pakistan's sphere of influence is in the region. But when it comes to bilateral issues, it is very important to remember that both countries have actually faced some kind of insurgency, some kind of terrorism as well. And today there was an incident in Iran as well. And with that in the view, I think both countries can benefit from cooperating on these matters. Add to this the fact that Pakistan's economy has been struggling in the past, now it is looking up. But Iran, since it got sanctions, its economy, especially when it comes to inflation, has really gone beyond anybody's imagination, although they are all producing country, and that is actually contributing to their stabilization, economic stabilization, but inflation is very high. So hopefully in coming days, whosoever comes to power in America, because then there's going to be some effort to renegotiate some kind of nuclear deal with Iran as well. may it be Democrats going back to JCPOA or Donald Trump coming up with something else. With that kind of a situation, perhaps both Iran and Pakistan can benefit from each other's economic resources and also the opportunities as well. And regarding regional issues, regarding international issues, I think that recently one of the Indian ministers actually snubbed Iranian leaders too regarding their statement on Kashmir. So both these countries have shared values, and they stem from OIC, because both are Muslim countries, and they work in tandem when it comes to those issues. And before there were sanctions, Iran and Pakistan were very close. Even during Afghan jihad, when Pakistan was on the other side of the divide and Iran was fighting Iraq, even at that time, both these countries stood together and kept on contributing to each other's well-being. So I hope that in coming days we see something more further fruitful coming from these visits.
All right, fingers crossed. And with that, viewers, it is the time to end our show. A huge thank you to Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal for sharing their opinions. It is a great privilege to be able to understand the regional and the international, the U.S. elections especially. So a huge thanks to Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal for breaking it down with us. And a huge thank you to our guests who joined us from the United States of America. And with that, viewers, you are watching The Debate here on PTV World. Take care.